Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the My Tutor online school. Today we're looking at GCSE Biology for this session. So if you're carrying on from another session, then it'll be the same principles as before, but if it's your first session today, it's the same as usual. We're addressing any questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and today we're looking at GCSE Biology, Plant Disease. I'm taking the session today. I'm Charlotte. I've taken the biology session so far, so those of you that have tuned in before, welcome back. We're continuing on with the subjects that we've been doing before, so infection and response is the module that we're working on at the moment. So this is continuing on with that. You haven't seen before is I studied conservation and biodiversity at the University of Exeter, and I now work for a charity advising farmers on how to be more environmentally friendly. So that's me. Okay, let's move on to the lesson. So we're continuing on today with infection and response. And we're going to look at plant disease rather than human disease. So I'm going to do some mini quizzes and things in this session as well. So before we go on, let's make sure that we know which is the chat function and which is the Q&A function. So I'm going to have both up on my screen. And what I'm going to try and do is we're going to have some mini quizzes and things like that. If you can answer those in the chat box. So the chat box has a speech bubble, I think, on it, and the Q&A has a double speech bubble. So any questions that you have about the content, put that in the question and answer box. Any answers to quizzes or anything like that in the chat box. And if you have any issues, technical difficulties and things, pop that in the Q&A as well. Bola from My Tutor is here as well, and she can help us with those. So worth thinking through. Okay, so last time we went through, we've kind of done a few sessions on human diseases, communicable diseases, what pathogens are, and then we had some kind of recap of that and some exam technique questions last session on how to answer different types of question. So now we've got just a little bit to do before we finish this topic on plant diseases. And that's what we're going to cover today, is the content of that. So plant diseases, how to identify them, the treatments for them. Some of this content is for higher, most of it's for foundation, some of it's for biology only, but all of it will be useful because it picks up on topics that we've done over the last few sessions as well, so it's all worth knowing about. Okay. So I've started with this question, are plant diseases as important as human diseases? Are as affected by pathogens as we are. And this is really important because apart from anything else, plants help to produce the oxygen that we breathe. They're part of the many ecosystems on Earth, and they're an integral part of life and of our lives. Any pathogens that affect plants can kill or reduce growth in plants by causing disease. So, for example, they might affect biodiversity. And the example that I've given there for that is Dutch disease and ash dieback, which are two diseases that affect lots of our trees in this country, in the UK. And they have decimated those species. So at the moment, ash dieback is running through our countryside. There's nothing that we can do to stop it, and we are losing most of our ash trees at the moment. And while obviously we don't eat ash trees, they do still help produce the oxygen that we breathe, and they are part of our ecosystems and part of that biodiverse landscape that helps to, well, to maintain our life. And secondly, plant diseases can affect food availability. And the example that I've given there for that is the Irish potato famine, which was a very famous historical event in Ireland, where potato blight was the disease in question, and many people starved. It was a national disaster. And we do still have crop diseases, which obviously affects our food availability if we can't get control of those. So that's why plant diseases are important and why we need to worry about them. What causes plant disease? This is a bit of a recap, linking it back to those human pathogens that we studied. So pathogens are microorganisms that cause disease. And we looked at 4 types of microorganisms that cause disease in humans. So we looked at viruses, bacteria, fungi, and protists. A couple of sessions ago now, and we've gone over those in topics and questions that we've answered since then. And it's those same types of microorganisms that can cause disease in plants as well. I've just included a quick kind of recap of what a pathogen does there. So a pathogen infects an organism, it then reproduces or replicates, because remember, viruses aren't technically alive, so they replicate rather than reproducing. They then spread, and then they infect another organism. So that's the kind of basic life cycle of a pathogen. So the first disease that we are going to look at in plants is tobacco mosaic virus. This is something that you do need to know for your specification if you're studying AQA. It's on a couple of the other specifications as well, but you need to double check if you're not studying the AQA specification, but the principles are the same. So tobacco mosaic virus infects tobacco plants and other related plants such as tomatoes and also peppers. It's transmitted by direct contact between plants or indirect contact through the hands of a farmer. And chloroplasts are the green organelles in a plant cell that are the site of photosynthesis. And it changes the chloroplast from green to white or yellow. So reduces the plant's ability to photosynthesize and so to grow properly. And that reduces the yield for farmers for tobacco plants. How is it cured? There's no direct cure. Farmers can only try to reduce the spread of disease or infection in the crop. If you were in the communicable disease session a couple of weeks ago, we did look at tobacco mosaic virus, so this might be familiar. This is one of the plant diseases that you need to know about. The other one that may well be quite familiar is rose black spot fungus. So rose black spot fungus infects rose plants. It's transmitted in air or water and through direct contact with gardeners. So a bit like tobacco mosaic virus in that case. It affects its host by causing black or purple spots on the leaves. That slowly kills the leaves so that they drop off and the plant can't photosynthesize or grow properly. And it will eventually die. How is it cured? Gardeners can use fungicides to kill the fungus and can remove and destroy infected leaves to reduce transmission. So there's kind of a bit of both there. Removing and destroying infected leaves means that they can't directly touch another plant. Hopefully you'd stop that spread within a plant, and then using that fungicide kind of directly attacks the pathogen itself. Okay. Those are 2 plant diseases that you need to know about that are caused by pathogens. The next thing that you need to know about that helps to cause plant disease are insects, and particularly aphids. So aphids are small bugs. You can see this picture of a leaf there with them all clustered on top of it. And aphids can infect any plant. They're just insects that are around us. They'll target almost any plant. Sometimes they're more partial to some than others. And obviously, if you have a lot of aphids in your garden, then most plants will get them. How is it transmitted? They transmit themselves. They can fly, so they fly between plants, and they'll reproduce and cover a plant, all of the leaves on a plant, quite quickly. How does this affect the plant? So aphids suck sap from new shoots. So the plant's trying to grow, and the aphids suck the sap that form the body of the plant in those new shoots. And so they reduce the plant's ability to grow, and eventually they'll kill it. So they're more of an infestation than a disease, to be honest. How are they cured? So gardeners often encourage ladybirds in the garden. Ladybirds are a natural predator of aphids, and so they act as a natural pest control method. So rather than using an insecticide, you might hope that ladybirds would be able to solve the problem for you. And finally, plant diseases can be caused by vitamin or mineral deficiencies. So there's two deficiencies that you need to know about: nitrate deficiency and magnesium ion deficiency. Nitrate deficiency is something that, a bit like aphids, it can affect any plant, because all plants need nitrate. They get nitrate from the soil or from water. A deficiency isn't transmitted as such because it's not caused by a pathogen. It's not, might even be described as a deficiency rather than a disease. It's caused by a lack of nitrates in the soil, or the plant not being able to take up those nitrates from the soil. How does it affect the host? How does it affect the plant? So plants absorb nitrates in water through their roots in order to produce proteins. So nitrates are part of the makeup of, part of the biochemistry of a protein molecule. And so without nitrates, fewer proteins can be produced. The first thing that's affected by the lack of proteins is chlorophyll, which is reduced. The lack of chlorophyll means the plant cannot photosynthesize and grow properly, and by now you're probably familiar with what happens after that. Lower yield, and the plant will eventually die. How is it cured? So farmers and gardeners often add chemical fertilizers or natural fertilizers, such as manure, to increase nitrate levels. So nitrate is a molecule, and it's present in manure in particular. That's the natural way that our soils would be fertilized. So there would be herbivores grazing those soils, or grazing plants growing on those soils, and therefore then in their dung, they return nitrate to the soil. We've also got chemicals now that can do that. Managing soils on farms means that we prevent nitrate decrease and prevent nitrate deficiency in crops and in plants that are growing on any soils. Okay, magnesium ion deficiency. So magnesium ion deficiency, again, can happen to any plant that can't take up magnesium ions properly, or where it's not available in the soil. So again, it's not transmitted as such, but it's caused by a lack of magnesium ions in the soil. How does it affect the host? So magnesium is required for making chlorophyll in plant leaves. So again, this is all linked to photosynthesis. And without chlorophyll, plants cannot photosynthesize properly, and they have reduced growth, and they may eventually die, affecting crop yield. Magnesium is a limiting factor in plant growth. Plants cannot grow without magnesium. So it's a really important deficiency. Magnesium can be added to soils artificially, but proper management of soils should prevent a deficiency in the first place. This is something that I now know a lot about through my job, but managing your soils, particularly when you're producing crops, is really important. And you can do that by rotating crops, because different plants return different things to the soil, and also making sure that livestock are part of that cycle to get the manure on there. So there's lots of things that you can do to manage soils to make sure that the plants always have the nutrients that they need. Okay, let's have a quick break there for a second. Let's have a look through the question and answer. Oh, some people are freezing a bit. I did test everything before I came on today, so it should be okay mine, but worth having a check through your checks as well. Someone's saying there's no cure for tobacco mosaic virus. Is it because people don't pay much attention to it? That's not really the case. Because tobacco mosaic virus is a virus, it is quite difficult to cure. So viruses, because they inhabit a host cells, are very difficult to treat without killing the host cells. Okay, let's have a go at the mini quiz. So use the chat function for this one. Number one, what type of pathogen causes rose spot or rose black spot disease? A, bacteria, B, virus, C, fungi, D, protist. A few of you have answered already, you're very on it. So use the chat function. Let's see what you think. Good, there's a few answers coming through now. A few more. Good, there's a couple of people saying fungi. That's great. So fungi is the correct answer there. So rose black spot disease is caused by rose black spot fungus. If you remember, we saw the rose plant with the purple spots on it. That's rose black spot disease. A few people are also saying virus. That's partly because we were just talking about tobacco mosaic virus, which is what was on the slide before. That's a separate pathogen that affects the plant. If you remember, it made the leaves on the plant go kind of white or yellow. Okay, question 2. What green pigment is affected by both nitrate and magnesium deficiency in plants? A, chloroplast, B, chlorophyll. Pop your answers in the chat box. A few more now. Good, yes, lots coming in. Chlorophyll is the correct answer. Bit of a trick question, that one. Chloroplast is the organelle that contains the chlorophyll, which is what enables photosynthesis to take place. So it's just checking your understanding of cell biology there. And number 3, what do aphids eat? A, sap, B, leaves, or C, flowers? Aphids were those insects that we talked about that cover leaves. Few answers coming in there. Any more in the chat box? Have a guess. A, sap, B, leaves, C, flowers. Oh, divided on this one. Very good. Those who have said sap, you're correct. Those who have said leaves, nearly correct. So quite often the sap is at the end of the leaves. So aphids target the sap in newly growing areas of the plant. So what a plant does when it grows is it sends out those new shoots, and those shoots are filled with sap, because sap is what carries the different minerals and things that the plant needs, and it's what sort of solidifies into that new growth. Aphids target that and stop the plant growth. Okay. Any more questions? There's a few answers in the Q&A box as well, which is great. Okay. Fab. Right, let's move on to the next section. So we've learned about a few plant diseases and what causes them. So that would be either pathogens, insects, or mineral deficiencies. So how can we detect and identify a plant disease? So how do we know that the plant has a disease in the first place? We've kind of looked at some of these already, but there are a list of symptoms here that you need to be able to use and to explain as part of exam questions. So we're going to run through them quickly. So stunted growth. So plants that have their growth inhibited may have small shoots, or they may just be small in stature, so be shorter than the others. Spots on leaves, covered that with the rose spot fungus here. There's that picture that we showed of that rose plant with the black spots on. Spots on leaves are often a symptom of fungus in particular in plants. Areas of decay or rot, so I've included this barley shoot here that's got some rot in it. Growths on the plant, so any abnormal growth can be caused by a disease as well, so odd lumps in different places can be caused by disease. Malformed stems or leaves, so I've included this picture here. This is of an ash tree branch that's got ash dieback. You can see that it's got this kind of abnormal growth and these malformed leaves. They've all turned downwards, they've curled in a bit, they look wrong, they look diseased. So that's another symptom. Discoloration. Here's our tobacco plant with the Mosaic virus, and you can see those areas where the chloroplasts have been turned to white or yellow. And the presence of pests. So we have our lovely picture of an aphid infested leaf, where you can definitely see that there is an insect infestation happening here. So those are the symptoms of disease to look out for. So in your garden, if you see any of these kind of signs on any of the plants, then they might have some sort of disease. And plants are a bit like us in that they can get lots of different diseases, but they're not always really affected by them. So like we can have a cold and yeah, we'll be maybe in bed for a couple of days, but then we're okay again. That can be the same with plants, and they might have several things that are slightly wrong with them, but they can withstand it at that time. But if it gets too bad and tips over that point where they can't cope anymore, then the disease will overtake them. Let me put that on silent. Okay, how can we detect and identify plant diseases? So we've run through what to look for, but then how do you know that it's actually a disease and that that plant just doesn't have a spot on it for some reason? So you can use books or the internet. Those are a really good way of starting to look for what your plant disease might be. You can also use garden centres. So quite often, if you can take a bit of the plant into a garden centre, they might be able to help you with what disease that plant might have. If it's quite bad, for example, in a crop, and there's lots of it, and it's something that no one can recognise, you might send a sample off to a laboratory. They can run some tests, find out what pathogen it is, match it up with others that they might have seen before, and perhaps start to come up with some sort of treatment of some sort. Or you can test with monoclonal antibodies. So some of you may have been in the lesson on monoclonal antibodies. It's a part of the specification that's mainly for hire. But we did talk about antibodies, didn't we, when we talked about infection and disease. So antibodies are the things that our white blood cells produce that catch onto a pathogen, make them all clump together, and then the other white blood cell comes along and engulfs it all. So you can use those monoclonal antibodies because they attach onto a specific thing. You can use them to find that specific thing, either within the body or within a plant. So you can use monoclonal antibodies that you know will attach onto a specific disease to see whether a plant would have that disease. It's all about having, you can see here, having that complementary shape that we talked about with enzymes as well. It's all about having complementary shapes between the antibody and with the proteins on the outside of a pathogen. Okay, another mini quiz. So use the chat box if you can, rather than Q&A. We'll try and keep the Q&A box for questions about the content itself, just to make it a bit easier. But in the chat box, name a symptom of plant disease. Anyone you can think of from that list that we talked about, pop it in the chat box. Let's see what you all think. Good. Loads coming in now. Discoloration, stem deformation, good. More discoloration, areas of decay, yeah, really good. Excellent. Stunted growth, yes, if you've got particularly short plants. Pests, yeah, if you can see those aphids, it's not good. Really good. More people saying presence of pests. Growths, yes, that's another one that we haven't had yet. So any abnormal kind of swellings or growths on the plant. Malformed stems again, yes, really good. Spots, yeah. Great. Good list there. Occasionally you'll have a 1 or 2 mark question in an exam where they say, what would you look for in a plant if it was diseased? Decay there, yeah, really good. Okay, and question 2. Which of these is not a way to identify a plant disease? A, books or the internet. B, tasting or smelling it. C, take a cutting to a garden centre. Or D, send a cutting to a laboratory. Which of those is not a way to identify a plant disease? B, yes, very good, can be dangerous. Probably wouldn't advise tasting or smelling a plant that you think may have a disease, or any plant at all actually, unless you're sure that it can be eaten. Great. Okay, any questions about that section? Pop them in the question and answer box if you do have any. Someone asking what stunts human growth? There's a variety of things that can stunt human growth. We can't go into them all now. Some of them are diseases and some of them can be deficiencies as well that can stunt human growth. What happens if you happen to smell the aphids and they go inside your body? Well, I think probably the same thing that happens when you swallow a fly when you're out running. I mean, I wouldn't try it. It's probably not going to do you any good in particular. Okay. So we talked about preventing and curing disease in humans. There's lots of different ways for that. So we talked about antibiotics, we talked about vaccination, and we talked about how our bodies are set up to prevent us from being invaded, I suppose, by a pathogen. Plant diseases are a bit different because it's not possible for us to vaccinate every plant or to give an antibiotic to a plant that's sick. That doesn't work. But plants have invented lots and lots of genius ways of defending themselves from pathogens, from deficiencies, and from things like aphids or other things that want to eat them. So we're going to run through the physical, chemical, and mechanical ways that they do that. You need to know about these. These will be the basis for fairly simple questions in the exam, perhaps some longer ones explaining how plants defend against disease. So to start with, bark on the outside of plants acts a bit like our skin. It's an outer layer of defense. And secondly, plants have a cellulose cell wall in each of their cells. If you remember the difference between animal and plant cells, plants have a cellulose cell wall. So as well as keeping the cell rigid alongside the vacuole inside, the cell wall is a barrier to pathogen entry to the cell. They also have a waxy cuticle on the leaf. My picture's just come up and obscured that. So a waxy cuticle is a layer on the top of the leaf, and it is effectively a barrier to pathogens entering the leaf. So if we look at the diagram at the bottom here, you can see the waxy cuticle on the top there, above the epidermis and the palisade mesophyll. The cell wall here around the outside of the plant cell. So those are physical defences. Then we have chemical defences. So there are some plants that have evolved chemicals as both a means of communication and as a means of defense. This is quite something that we've discovered quite recently in plants, and it's very cool. So some plants produce antibacterial chemicals, which limit the spread of bacteria, not stopped by physical defenses. We've known about this particular thing for quite a long time, and we use them in antiseptics. So, for example, aloe vera, which is a plant, produces aloe vera gel. That's really good for cooling any inflammation and other things like that. You might have used it as after sun. It's quite often how it's used. Other plants use chemicals as a defense rather than as a kind of direct attack on any pathogens. So, for example, nettles have a poison which stings anything that tries to eat them. If you've ever tried to pick up a nettle, it's very difficult to do without being stung. It causes that nettle rash on us. So those are all chemical defenses in a plant. And then finally, we have some mechanical defenses. These are quite specific examples. For various plants have evolved quite unique mechanical ways of either defending against disease or defending against predation being eaten. Thorns and hairs are fairly simple. They protect plants from damage and may keep water safe in the case of cacti. So we've got a picture there of a bramble with lots of thorns on it. If you've ever tried to pick up a bramble or get through a bramble patch, it's very difficult because of the thorns, and it's the same for anything that wants to eat them. In the same way, cacti, they are designed to store water in their stems, and so they have big spines in order to stop anything trying to get hold of that water, so to try and keep that water for the plant use only. Cacti are adapted for really hot environments where water is scarce. That's why they've adapted that, that shape and that ability to store water inside them. And so it's something worth protecting, that water in that environment. There's also a specific example of a plant called Mimosa pudica that droops its leaves. So if you got a nice diagram there, if you add a light touch, the plant rotates and droops its leaves to make it less easy to land on or to eat or to get hold of. So it has that mechanical movement as a defense mechanism. And finally, mimicry. So this is something that you kind of see in animals sometimes where they mimic their predators, but it also happens in plants. So the passion flower has a really cool mimicking, or has evolved to mimic butterfly eggs. So it has yellow spots on its leaves, which you can see in the bottom photo, and they look like butterfly eggs. The female butterfly comes along, sees those spots and goes, "Oh, don't want to lay my eggs there," because it doesn't want its offspring to have any competition when they hatch. So it doesn't lay its eggs on the leaves, and the plant suffers less caterpillar damage, because when those eggs hatch, there'll be a caterpillar, they'll eat the leaf. Okay, final mini quiz for this session. So question 1, what outer part of a plant acts as the first line of defense against disease? A, bark, B, bite, C, cellulose cell wall. Pop your answers in the chat box. Good. There's a few coming in there saying A, bark. Brilliant. That's correct. So bark is that woody outer layer of a plant that acts as the first line of defense, a bit like our skin. Question 2, which part of a leaf protects it from infection? A, palisade mesophyll, B, stomata, or C, the waxy cuticle? Which one did we talk about that provides that layer at the top of a leaf that prevents a pathogen infecting the leaf cells? Good, quite a few people saying C, waxy cuticle, that's right. Brilliant. And then 3, which of these, oh, I've typed is twice, which of these is not a mechanical plant defense? So A, thorns, B, poisons, C, mimicry, or D, drooping leaves. So think back to that last slide. Which of them is not a mechanical plant defense? Okay, I'll give you a second to pop your final answers in for that one. Quite divided on that one. Good, there's quite a few saying poisons. That's the correct answer. So poisons are a chemical plant defense rather than a mechanical plant defense. So if we pop back through those 3 slides, so here we learned about physical defenses, which was bark, cell wall, and waxy cuticle. And then we learned about chemical defenses, so antibacterial chemicals, such as those found in aloe vera, like antiseptics, and poisons. And then also mechanical defenses, so thorns and hairs, drooping leaves, and mimicry were 3 examples of mechanical defenses. Okay, any questions about that last section? Pop them in the Q&A box. I'll have a little scroll now, see what we can find. Someone's asking, why do snowdrops have antifreeze? Snowdrops do have a very mild form of antifreeze. That's purely because they kind of get a head start to other plants and that they flower quite early on in the season. Snowdrops are one of the first things that we see flowering, and because of that, sometimes it's quite cold. And antifreeze is the way that they've evolved to adapt to that challenge, and so they're less likely to be affected by frost. Can aphids become a pest for humans like fleas? No, don't worry. What is the function of the waxy cuticle? That was as a physical defense on the leaf. So the waxy cuticle is a waxy layer. It's quite a tough layer on top of the leaf. It's a bit like skin, a bit like bark on the stem. It stops a pathogen gaining entry to the leaf cells. Can thorns help to take water away, kind of like the drip tip leaves? I suppose they can, but that's certainly not what they're designed for. What is aloe vera used for? So aloe vera is generally used for if you've got any cuts that have swelled up. It tends to reduce inflammation. It's very good for that. Antiseptic, so it's quite antibacterial. It's got some antimicroorganism properties. Another example is witch hazel. So quite often if you look at skincare products, there'll be witch hazel in those. That comes from the witch hazel plant. And that also has kind of antiseptic properties. Can be quite good for putting on your face because it can reduce spots. Okay, let's have a look at some past paper questions. Got a couple of past paper questions here that I hope will kind of give you good examples of how this topic would be used in an exam. So we'll go through some exam technique for those. And if you think of any more questions, do put them in the Q&A box about anything this lesson. And I'll do another question and answer session at the end, I think. Okay, so in this question, as always, we underline the keywords. I'll do them in red. So plants have adaptations to help defend themselves and to help them survive. Oh, been learning about this. Figure 1 shows a nettle plant. Explain how the nettle is adapted for defense and protection. 3-mark answer here. So we need to include 3 keywords or points in our answer. And it says explain. So we need to explain a mechanism. We don't need to name all of the defenses. We need to explain how they defend. So from the mark scheme, this answer, believe it or not, although it's 1 sentence, is worth 3 marks. So stinging hairs sting animals that try to eat them. That's the nettles. So less of the plant is damaged. So that's a very short way of saying that nettles have stinging hairs on them, on their stems and their leaves. They have a chemical in them that sting animals that try to eat them or humans that try to pick them. And therefore less of the plant is damaged. So the nettle doesn't have a problem with growth. It can continue to photosynthesize as normal and it preserves itself as a whole. Okay, this one's got a little bit of a kind of scientific base to it, so a bit more of a practical base. So we talked briefly about witch hazel. So witch hazel is another plant adapted for defense. Witch hazel, which is the plant, produces oil with antiseptic properties. The oil prevents bacteria from attacking the plant. Okay. A student investigated how effective 3 different plant oils were at preventing the growth of bacteria. And then figure 2 shows the results. So we have to underline 3 in there, so we know there's 3 different oils. So if we have a look at the figure before we even look at the question, let's have a good look at what we're looking at there. So we've got an agar plate, which you should know about from some of your practicals if you've done some biology practicals so far in a lab. An agar plate is what we grow bacteria on. We've got 3 paper discs there. So we've got a paper disc soaked in clove oil. Got a paper disc soaked in lemon oil. And a paper disc soaked in witch hazel oil. And we know that there's bacterial colonies growing on this agar plate. So which plant oil is the most effective at preventing the growth of bacteria? So we want most effective at preventing growth of bacteria. Give a reason for your answer. So if we look at each of those 3 dots, we can see that the paper disc soaked in lemon oil doesn't have any space around it. So the bacteria have continued to grow around that dot as normal. Whereas the witch hazel we can see that the witch hazel oil there has created a bit of a space around the disc. That space is where bacteria hasn't been able to grow. Now, the best at this is the clove oil. So clove oil has the biggest space around it. So clove oil has the largest area with no bacteria growing. That would be enough to get you those 2 marks there. Okay, finally. The student tested tea tree oil using the same method. So they also use that agar plate, they put on a little disc of tea tree oil. The results showed tea tree oil was the most effective at preventing bacterial growth. So tea tree oil has the most antibacterial, antiseptic properties. The student concluded that tea tree oil could be used to treat bacterial infections instead of antibiotics. Give 1 reason why this is not a valid conclusion for 1 mark. So this is a quick, simple answer. So tea tree oil was not tested alongside antibiotics. So although we know that tea tree oil is the best of those oils at preventing growth of bacteria, we don't know how it performs alongside antibiotics. And the chances are that antibiotics are probably going to be more effective for bacteria. Okay. Any more questions? Let's have a look through. Can you use aloe vera in a drink? And also, what's the hardest science to study out of physics, biology, and chemistry? Oh, that's a hard question. As far as aloe vera in a drink goes, I'm not actually sure. I think I've heard of it being used in a drink before, but I definitely recommend checking any product that you use before thinking about drinking it. So double check first, either use the internet or check with a pharmacy technician, they would know. Usually it's used on your skin, as someone has said. Can we go back to slide 1 so you can take a couple of notes? Yes, no problem. What's the hardest science to study out of physics, biology, and chemistry? That's a really hard question. It depends very much on you, really, on what you enjoy, what you're naturally good at, and in some sense what you need to get into university. So I'm assuming that question is coming from an idea of what you should take on to A-level. And the answer is think about what you want to do at university if you want to go to university, or what you want to do afterwards if not, be that an apprenticeship or anything else. Have a think about what might be the most useful for that. And also take into account what you enjoy most. Some people really love physics, others really love chemistry, others really love biology. Some people love all 3 and take all 3. I love biology. That's why I studied it, why I continue to work in a biological field, and why I'm teaching you now. So I'm probably a bit biased, really, about answering that. There's no way really of saying which is most difficult. On a 3-mark question like the first example question you showed, is it best to go into more detail, or can it be a simple answer? That's a really good question. And I usually recommend that you make a point per mark. So normally I would say that a 3-mark question needs either a couple of keywords and a couple of sentences. That one in particular, all three of the things that they were looking for could be put into one sentence. So they were looking for, let's go back to that slide. Oh, no, is it this one? Yes. So they wanted to know that the nettle had stinging hairs, or that it stung. They wanted to know that they sting the things to try to eat them, and they wanted to know why the plant did that, so to stop it being damaged. And all of those were quite easy to say in one sentence, but equally you could have said them in three. So nettles have stinging hairs. These hairs stop animals trying to eat them. This means that less of the plant is damaged. So it was a way of making 3 points in one sentence. But it's worth always thinking through the three things that you need to say to get points on those. And sometimes those are keywords and sometimes those are explanations in this case. I want to be a dentist. What GCSE grade would I need to get into college? The answer is that I'm not sure. It would be worth double checking with your college. Some requirements differ between them. Usually I think it's 5 A stars to C, but it does differ, so it's worth double checking. And those can be across different subjects, so don't worry if there's some that you don't find as easy. Oh, someone's saying thank you. That's really nice. You're very, very welcome. Okay. Chance to ask any more questions. I'm just having a last flick through to make sure I haven't missed any on the chat function as well as the Q&A. Would you recommend any good ways to teach yourself things? Doing biology for A-level, but they weren't taught all the GCSE content. So it's really difficult at the moment for you guys, and I do appreciate that, in that your school years were quite often finished early. You're heading in next year with a little bit less than you had hoped, perhaps, or if you're in your first year of GCSEs, you've stopped a little bit there, or you haven't taken your exams and it's all over the place. There's lots and lots of things being put into place now to make sure that you're not set back by that. So don't worry, you're not going to be less able to do your exams or do well in your exams because of this. Teachers are working really hard all over the country, and there's things like this being put in place all the time. So don't worry about that. They will make sure that you catch up. But if you do want to do some work in the meantime, this is certainly a really good place to start the online school. We're working through content slowly but surely, making sure that you've kind of either using these as revision sessions or going through that content. You can also look at BBC Bite Size for GCSE. It's really, really good. It has everything on there that you need to know. It's split up by specification. It's got lots and lots of resources. Check that out for GCSE. For A-level content, there's lots of sites online that you can use as well. I quite like one called Physics and Maths Tutor. That one I find really good for revising. It's got some really good summaries of the content, and then it's got practice questions by topic, so you can answer questions specific to your topic rather than doing a whole past paper when you haven't covered it all. So that's quite a good revision site as well. And there's lots of others as well. Just make sure when you're looking at these things on the internet that that they're specific to the specification that you're going to do, because otherwise you can be learning examples that aren't relevant. And make sure that they're accredited in some way, so they're not just someone who happens to be good at biology. If you want to go into a medical career, should you do a biology GCSE? Double check with wherever you want to go afterwards, so be that college, university, or into some sort of apprenticeship or internship in medical career, because you can do those. The answer is probably yes. In short, you will need a biology or human biology GCSE. How hard is it to get an A? That very much depends on you, and on all manner of things. Will there be any French lessons on this website? I'm not sure. I think we're working on setting up loads of different subjects at the moment. So I think watch the website, watch this space, and they'll definitely let you know on there. Okay. Someone also asked when the next biology session will be. So the next one that I'm taking is on Friday, and it's going to be a revision session of the entirety of infection and response. So that's communicable diseases, pathogens, plant disease, antibiotics, vaccination, physical defenses to disease, white blood cells, our immune system, all of that we've been going through for the past 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have a look over. So what I've decided to do is kind of open up the floor for questions, really. So if you've got any questions from the content that we've used over the last few weeks, bring them with you next time. And what I'll do is I'll have all of the presentations that we've used up till now, and I'll pluck different slides over from there, and we can have a look through them and go over some stuff again if we need to. And then I've got lots of past paper questions for us to look through. Make sure that you're prepared for any questions that might come up in the exam. So that's what we're going to do on Friday. And then next week, we're going to start a different topic. So that'll be a last revision session on Friday, just to end the week. And I promise it will be fun, quite fun. Will there be any more higher biology sessions? So where we have bits of the specification that are higher, we will try and mark them for you. There was some of today's that was, but it was very much linked into everything else, so I didn't highlight it specifically. So there will be some, and we will highlight them where we can. But most of the content is applicable to foundation and to higher. So I know at school you might be in different classes, but a lot of the time you are learning the same things. So don't worry, you're not wasting your time. Friday's lesson will be focused on both higher and foundation. Like I say, a lot of them overlap. So it won't be a waste of time. Definitely come. Okay, that's probably all we've got time for this week. Bola, have you got anything to add at all?
Hey, thanks for an amazing session, Charlotte. That was great. If, as I see a lot of you have enjoyed Charlotte's session, and rightly so. If you are looking for some more personalized learning, we offer one-on-one tuition, which you can find out more about on our site. But no, that's it from me. Also remember that each session is recorded, so you can go onto our YouTube channel at any point and rewatch any videos you need to. Yes, that's it for me. Thank you again, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a lovely evening, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.